In today's cave diving tale, one of the most terrifying situations that a cave diver may encounter is losing sight of a team member in one of the world's most hazardous cave diving locations. Make sure to finish the audio if you want to fully understand this horrific tale. Maria Arriage, who went scuba diving in the Grand Cenote, is the tragic subject of this story. Southeast Mexico's Tulum is approximately 3 miles, 5 kilometers, from this cave. Gran Canote is a moderately accessible place for snorkeling and swimming into the caverns for a breathtaking view of the light beams, striking the water through the cave opening and exploring the rock formations. Divers can explore the rock formations through a network of white-walled tunnels. This cenote is really composed of several smaller ones that meander through the lush forest floor and are connected by wooden pathways. The Maya civilization is claimed to have placed a high value on cenotes. In addition to being their main source of water, cenotes were also believed to be entrance to the Ixbalba or underworld and a location frequented by the Mayan gods, particularly Chik, the god of rain, lightning, and thunder. Your sense of direction may be affected by the cenote's extremely dark areas. The Gran Canote has already taken 5 lives. Maria Arriage, a citizen of Bakersfield and a qualified teacher, was born on December 17, 1977. She was always prepared to dive. Since she was a small child, she had only occasional divers for friends. In Wasco, Amy taught for 13 years. For the past 3 years, she has taught science and English to 7th graders in grades 5 and 6. Her students said she was really inspirational. It was obvious how devoted she was to her family. Because Amy's heavenly mother, Maria Arriage, passed away 2 years ago on October 18, she visited her father's home every day to see how he was doing. After her mother passed away, Amy made sure her father, Tom Arriage, felt loved and cared for. She regularly spoke about her father to all of her friends and was really proud of him. Amy and Alessandro Morano went on a fun dive in the Sac Acton Cave Network on November 26, 2016. The Grand Cenote was the starting point, and that is where they would finish. To document her dive and show her friends and family back in the United States what she was doing, she requested Alessandro to shoot pictures and films of her. Her open water side mount course, the full cave course, a day of intro to cave course refresher training, and all of the cave course dives were all taught by Alessandro. On November 24, 2016, she finished the training with an excellent performance. Just to refresh your memory, she finished her training 2 days prior to the dive we will be talking about. It was explained and agreed that Amy would always be diver number 1 for this dive in the Sac Acton cave system, regardless of whether the loop was finished in a single dive or not. Following the upstream line, they were to use a reel to connect to the Canote loop line and then another jump to the right to connect to the end of the loop line, as was agreed upon by both parties. They decided to eliminate the jump and go along the line to the exit if they used the rule of thirds to get to the Canote loop line. During the dive briefing, Alessandro did remind Amy how they would go on the circuit. Much as she had rehearsed on the circuit in Cenote Minotauro on November 23, one of the final days of her cave training, Amy was also informed by Alessandro that divers could always utilize the Cenote Hodel, which is near to the start of the Canote loop gap, as an emergency exit, and that the cenote could be found by the natural light coming through the cenote entrance. Another little cenote called No Name is located further ahead and to the left. It is not as visible from the line as Cenote Hodel, but it can be seen by covering the primary lights. During planning, they decided on a maximum depth of 40 feet, 12 meters, and if they didn't reach their jump reel, which was placed at the start of the loop, using 1/3 of their gas, they would turn around and exit the cave using the same line. Amy did check the pressure in her tank and recorded the return pressure, anticipated time, and depth on her slate. As Alessandro was making the films for her, Amy agreed to be the dive leader for the duration of the dive once they completed their gear check on the surface. In fact, the plunge started at 11:26 a.m. since they were the first team to enter the cave and there was no other line linked to the cave line prior to theirs. Alessandro put their primary reel from open water around the cavern line to prevent disturbing the subterranean tours. As decided upon during the pre-dive preparations, Alessandro strung a cookie from the rope and gave Amy the order to take over as leader. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term cookie, it refers to a personal marker, also known as a Ryan marker, that is positioned on the line that divers use between crossings. It serves as a check to make sure the team leader doesn't leave anyone behind. A few minutes later, when they reached the arrows pointing in both directions, where the line makes a 90-degree angle and the Paso del Lagarto leap is located, they deposited a cookie certifying their exit. Around minute 25 into the dive, they finally made it to the line gap and Alessandro showed Amy the natural light coming from the Cenote Hotel at that time. Alessandro gave her the go-ahead signal after verifying her air supply, depth, and time. She did ask for the gap after checking her air supply, depth, and time. Amy filled in the space and Alessandro added a cookie bearing his initials AM after canceling the arrow at the line's end and beginning to lay the line in the direction of Cusana loop. Amy filled in the space and added a cookie. After some time, they came to the loop jump. Amy again assessed the air pressure, depth, and time at the loop jump before asking Alessandro for permission to leap, to which he consented. Before the cave arrows, Amy put his second white arrow bearing her name, this time with her leap orange line connected. They started to follow the line loop counterclockwise after she linked her line directly to the end or start of the loop line, installed a cookie, and waved OK to Alessandro. When they reached the double arrow pointing the closest road out, Alessandro asked Amy for her pressure to evaluate whether they needed to mark it or whether they could complete the circle in a single dive. She retorted her pressure was between 2,300 and 2,200 pounds per square inch. She gave her the go-ahead to carry out the pre-dive plan as planned because Alessandro's pressure was similar. Alessandro attempted to get her attention so he could record a video of her as they passed the cenote no-name sign. To view and capture on camera the natural light flowing from the cenote, he nevertheless covered the lights. The cave line and no-name cenote were then located on the left and right, respectively. Alessandro couldn't see Amy or see her light when he turned around, even though she was between him and the wall. Alessandro did swim around a formation blocking his view, anticipating seeing Amy immediately around the formation, making a 90-degree turn in a line. Alessandro continued forward, thinking Amy was in front as she wasn't visible to her. Even though Amy followed the jump line out and left the leap to be recovered by Alessandro as intended, she was still nowhere to be found when they got to our jump line. For 2 to 3 minutes, Alessandro waited for another opportunity to lay his line, but she was nowhere to be seen. Alessandro did, however, retrieve the markers and the line because she was certain she was in front. She should not continue looking for too long because the other diver would typically be outside, as they just mentioned in her training, and she should never risk her safety. They had a second jump reel with a yellow line installed next to theirs on the jump, and they were both connected to the opposing team's REM marker, or cookie. Alessandro made a serious error by taking both the cookie and the reel off. He knew in his mind she was ahead of him at the moment. The primary reel remained in place as Alessandro withdrew the gap reel and cookie. He did this because he needed to know right away if Amy was okay outside because he hadn't yet caught up with her. To find Amy, Alessandro returned to the surface. He thought Amy was nearby when he saw some lights outside the lake, but it was only another couple getting ready to jump in. They said that they had seen a girl when Alessandro asked them if they had seen a blonde woman wearing a blue helmet. They demanded to take the shortcut that led to a hotel in the cave after asking where she went. Alessandro immediately descended there, but when he reached the entrance to the cenote and searched for her, he couldn't find her. Alessandro got out of the water and started hunting for people who had tanks he could borrow. He grabbed his cell phone and attempted to call a fellow diver named Fernando, but the call was unsuccessful. He then put down his cell phone, picked up his keys with the help of a guide, and obtained one of his tanks. The left tank had a pressure of 3,000 pounds per square inch, and the right tank was provided by one of the team members who he asked for Amy on the shortcut. At this point, it was approximately 1:47 p.m. Around 2:13 p.m., he entered by himself. He connected the gap, jumped, and then took the identical path that Amy had planned, posting the markings this time using a permanent marker. Just as Amy had intended, he circled the loop in the opposite direction. He found Amy's body lying on her back at the line, face up after the constraints, very close to Cenote's no name, with one of her cookies placed next to her. The tanks were empty, the regulator was not in her mouth, but the mask was on. In an effort to force air down, Alessandro unhooked her mount and placed his long hose into her mouth. She remained silent but had some foam coming from her mouth. She wasn't responsive after Alessandro pulled her head out of the water in the sand, took off her helmet and mask, and tried to revive her. When the two back mount divers came, one of them also tried CPR. Then a third diver showed up the side mount and announced that he was a former rescue diver who was looking to help. While the other guys moved the equipment out, he offered directions and urged Alessandro to follow him. He began to sink when he reached the leap, and one of Amy's fins became hooked up in the cave line. The diver was then urged to follow Alessandro and let him handle the body. After 35 minutes of diving, Alessandro returned the body to the Grand Cenote after getting his approval. While his fellow teachers waited, Alessandro called the police, handed the body over to them, and then waited to provide a statement. Police arrived, removed the body, and then had it autopsied. Alessandro was questioned and provided with the proper answers. As the inquiry progressed, it became clear that Amy had strayed from her intended course and wound up in a pitch-black cave. She attempted to return the way she came but got lost again because there was no light. Her oxygen level in the tank fell, and she was gone for good after a while. It had been 20 minutes before Alessandro saw her lifeless body. This was Amy Maria Arriage's terrible tale of her first cave dive after finishing her training. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you like what you saw, click the like button, think about subscribing, and click the bell icon to get notified when we post another thrilling cave diving story.